What's up, everybody? I am your host, a short, old psychic lady with some junk in the trunk, and that is my co-host, an evil closet portal to the unknown. And welcome to the Grindhouse Syndicate, where today we cover our first ghost movie. At least we think it's the first.
Talk to me.
Yep, that's
Talk
a ghost
to me
movie.
was a ghost
Okay,
movie.
all right. Our second ghost movie.
Our first Poltergeist movie.
Yep. Our first haunted house movie. That sounds more accurate.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
But yeah, on this episode, we'll be doing Tobe Hooper's and Steven Spielberg's Poltergeist from 1982. This is our first film back after our Fan Appreciation Month, where you guys picked the movies for the whole month. But now we are back in the driver's seat, and oh boy, did I pick a long one. I did not remember that this was a 2-hour-long movie. I don't remember it being that long.
I remember telling you it was long, especially compared to the remake, which was awful.
I have not seen it.
Yeah, the remake is a lot shorter from what I remember. This one's definitely runs on. They do an interesting thing where the movie kind of climaxes and you think it's over.
Yep.
Like they could have ended the movie there, but
Yeah.
then they hit it with an even bigger climax, which I loved the ending, the very end. I don't remember if the remake did that. I think the remake may have just ended where you think this movie's going to end.
When did the remake come out?
I would probably say 2012.
I got it in here somewhere. I barely mentioned
It's awful. It's not worth remembering.
You know, I always thought that you would pick this movie because this is a much more meaningful movie to you than it is to me.
Yeah, this movie definitely holds a special place in my heart as one of the earlier horror movies that I ever got to see. I was probably 4 or 5, somewhere in there, the first time I seen this movie. And there's a handful of scenes that really have always stuck out to me. You know, this, The Exorcist, Phantasm,
Fantastic.
the original Evil Dead. Those are some of the movies that really stuck out to me and had scary moments in them that, 5-year-old me was laying in bed under the covers thinking about at some point, and what ended up leading to a love for horror.
And a show for horror.
A show, a love, a house full of horror stuff.
I know we have talked about this before, like all the weird coincidences that have happened with this show, but we got another one. I picked this movie and I started working on it on June 3rd. The next day, I see all over the internet that this movie was released on June 4th of 1982. So the 42nd anniversary. Weird. I had no idea. No idea. I wanted to do kind of a ghost movie because we don't do many of them. I'm not a big fan of a lot of ghost movies, but I am a fan of this one. So I kind of picked, one that I really liked. And I wanted it to be kind of a classic that a lot of people know. And, Poltergeist. And what a coincidence.
Yeah, the coincidences just keep on rolling in. Feel like it's just, and it was actually another movie that was supposed to come up this week.
Yeah,
but
I changed it.
A conversation led to it getting changed, and then come to find out that conversation took place on the anniversary of it coming out. So definitely weird coincidences. I do think we don't cover many haunted house ghost movies. A lot of the ghost movies that have come out over the past 20 years are a lot of, I feel like, and I know you feel this way to a certain extent, they're copy and pasted.
Yeah.
A lot of them are just the same thing. So it's really hard to watch them, and a lot of them, especially from like 2005 to 2015, for me, a lot of them blend together because a lot of them feel like the same exact movie. This came out before there was a shit ton of ghost movies that were just copy and pasted, but this was also a very different movie than even the ghost movies that we've gotten since. It's a really, really interesting take on a spirit paranormal movie.
Yeah, I got some things that I think really mold the film, but I'm gonna save it for the end of the show. I will say that I do believe that this movie paved the way for movies like Insidious and the Conjuring movies because you had that same, like, tight bonded family ghost shit happening and somebody's got to come in and help. Some outside knowledgeable person or team has to come in and do it. And those movies, they don't quite capture the magic that I think this does with the family. So I'm gonna talk more about that later, but
I
yeah,
I
that's my opinion.
I agree with the Insidious part. That's something I did pick up whenever we were watching this was Insidious really kind of ripped off
Yeah,
of the whole other dimension kind of in between life and the afterlife and somebody getting, especially a kid getting trapped in this dimension and they got to save them. And what's funny is I think the dad in this movie looks a lot like
yeah,
the
he
dad
does.
in that movie.
I think I don't want to say he like steals that guy's thunder, but he could almost be his son. You're talking about Craig T. Nelson.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He's the Conjuring guy too.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. He that actor just he could be this he could be Craig T. Nelson's son. Like I would believe it if they were somehow related.
Yeah.
He definitely gives that vibe.
Yeah. As soon as I seen him, I was like, holy shit, those two look a lot
Yeah.
alike. I actually even thought about if he was the dad of that guy. Like, is that
That's
guy
what I'm
famous
saying, like,
because no, but I actually thought that. Like, I
uh,
was like, I'm gonna have to look this up and make sure that guy didn't get famous from being this guy's son.
the Nepo baby. Alright, so let's get into Poltergeist. But first, if you want to stay up to date on what is going on with us or the show, talk about or submit your movie request, or just say hey, you can always find us at one of our social media accounts or our official website at grindhouse.horror.pod.com. Facebook at the Grindhouse Syndicate Horror Podcast, Instagram at grindhousesyndicate.horror.pod, and many more, which you can find links for in the show notes as always. And please subscribe or follow for alerts on new episodes. And if you really love us and don't want us to get kidnapped by an evil spirit, give us a review. All right, so Poltergeist is a 1982 American supernatural horror film directed by Tobe Hooper and written by Steven Spielberg, Michael Grais, and Mark Victor from a story by Spielberg. It stars Jo Beth Williams, Craig T. Nelson, Beatrice Straight, and was produced by Spielberg and Frank Marshall. The film focuses on a suburban family whose home is invaded by a poltergeist that abduct their youngest daughter. As Spielberg was contractually unable to direct another film while he did E.T., Hooper was selected based on his work on Texas Chainsaw Massacre and The Funhouse. The origin of Poltergeist can be traced to Night Skies, which Spielberg conceived as a horror sequel to his 1977 film Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Hooper was less interested in the sci-fi elements and suggested they collaborate on a ghost story. Accounts differ as to the level of Spielberg's involvement, but it is clear that he was frequently on set during filming and exerted significant creative control. For that reason, some have said that Spielberg should be considered the film's co-director or even main director, though both Spielberg and Hooper have disputed this. I looked a lot into this. In my opinion, obviously I wasn't there, and from the movie I seen, it's a Spielberg movie.
Yeah,
This is not like when you look at Texas Chainsaw Massacre and then you look at this is like two completely different styles. I do believe Toby had a lot of say in the shots and stuff. From what I've seen, a lot of people that were there on set, like, Toby Hooper would set the shot up and then Spielberg would make the adjustments he wanted.
I believe this was shortly after. I don't know if it was the very next movie for Toby Hooper.
He did
I
Texas
think.
Chainsaw Massacre and The Funhouse, both kind of low budget movies. This was his first big movie.
Yeah, you had made the comment before I watched it about it being a more definitely having a Spielberg feel to
Oh,
it,
it definitely does to me.
and, having that thought in my mind as I was watching it, it's undoubtedly way more Spielberg than Hooper, for
Now,
sure.
Spielberg did like actually direct a scene when I think Tobe Hooper wasn't there. And you can tell what scene it is. It is the scene, the very beginning, where they show the neighborhood and the guys riding on the bike.
Yeah.
And it looks very Spielberg, man.
Yeah,
There's no
the whole
denying it.
the whole opening, definitely. And having that in my mind and watching just the opening scene, I was like, "Oh yeah, this definitely." I've never noticed that before. It's been a while since I watched it, but it is very, for it being a paranormal ghost movie and it being as dark as it is, or as dark of a subject matter, it is a very bright movie.
It was supposed to be way darker. Like if you go back and you actually read what the original version of the story was, like Carol Ann dies in the first half of the movie. They kill her off. And there was Spielberg cut all the dark stuff out of it. And coming from the guy who did Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I don't think that he would have cut all of the dark stuff out of it. Spielberg had all the control over special effects. The problem is with he was doing E.T. at the time, but E.T. had these delays, so it allowed him to then be on this set. And this movie and E.T. were filmed just a few miles apart. So, him being able to go back and forth to the sets, it's totally plausible. I think really what happened was Spielberg wanted to make both these movies. He wasn't allowed to he had to pick one or the other. He went with the E.T., and I think he needed a director that would stand in for a director, but he had to be new enough where, because if you were somebody like Tobe Hooper and Steven Spielberg hires you to direct, and then he comes in and kind of takes over, what are you going to do? Are you going to tell Spielberg to fuck off?
Yeah,
No.
with it being his first big budget movie, it's easier to, I don't want to say walk all over, but get your input in with a new director doing his first big
Yeah.
budget movie. He's not gonna shoot himself in the foot.
Yeah, and Spielberg actually said in an interview that, he essentially had to come in and kind of do a lot of the directing because he said Tobe Hooper is not he's a very kind of quiet, reserved guy, and he doesn't know how to call shots. And he said I had to come in and be the shot caller. So, I mean, and then, he caught a lot of shit for saying that because it took the credit away from Tobe Hooper, and he had to actually go back and say, well, no, 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 like he still directed a lot of the movie. But yeah, it depends on whose account you hear from. Some people say, Toby directed them, and a lot of people say Spielberg really did it. Toby was just there. So,
Yeah, it definitely has a Spielberg feel. It feels like, like that opening shot feels like E.T.
oh yeah.
Like it feels like an opening shot to E.T. But I will say that I don't think it hurts the movie. It gives it a really unique feel to it for the subject matter. And I think it makes the really dark scenes contrast really well. Like it makes those darker scenes almost scarier. And maybe that's why certain scenes stuck out so much to me as a kid, because outside of those scenes, you don't feel like you're watching that type of movie.
It was released by Metro Goldwyn Mayer through MGM Entertainment, and on June 4th, 1982, Poltergeist was a major critical and commercial success, becoming the eighth highest grossing film of 1982. In the years since its release, the film has been recognized as a horror classic. It was nominated for 3 Academy Awards, named by the Chicago Film Critics Association as the 20th scariest film ever made, and a scene made Bravo's 100 Scariest Movie Moments. Poltergeist also appeared at number 84 on American Film Institute's 100 Years, 100 Thrills. The film was followed by Poltergeist 2, The Other Side in 1986, Poltergeist 3 in 1988, and a remake that I have yet to see. It had a budget of 10.7 million and a box office of 121.7 million. Principal photography rolled mostly on Roxbury Street in Simi Valley, California. Following completion of principal photography in the first week of August 1981, Hooper went on to spend 10 weeks in the editing room compiling the first cut of the film. During much of this time, Spielberg was at Industrial Lights and Magic, supervising the visual effects photography. Quick note, the Poltergeist curse is an urban legend based around the fact that there have been several unfortunate deaths of actors who appeared in the franchise, as well as other strange events. It is believed by some to have been cursed by the use of real skeletons on set. This became the focus of the Curse of the Poltergeist from 2002. There are documentaries, there are shows about this, there's probably a ton of YouTube stuff. There's a lot of information about the Poltergeist curse. If you're interested in that, check it out. Some of it's pretty creepy, I will admit. Some of it I don't think is that big of a deal, but this is considered one of the cursed films.
Yeah, I know that it was speculated that it was brought about with the use of the real bodies in the pool scene. I actually seen though when they were talking about that on cursed films, apparently that was a pretty common thing back in the day because it was much cheaper
Yeah.
to just get a dead body than it was to actually make a really realistic one.
Tobe Hooper actually used that very method on Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is why a lot of people think it was used here.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. All right, so the ratings, Rotten Tomatoes, an 88%. IMDb, a 7.3 out of 10. Letterboxd, a 3.5 out of 5. And the Google average audience rating is a 4 out of 5 stars. If you would like to watch this movie, you can currently find it streaming for free on Pluto TV and rent on Apple, Amazon, Google Play, and Fandango. All right, you ready for some plot action?
I am.
All right. So we start off with the national anthem playing on TV, and for those who don't remember, they did this when basically it was so late at night. From my memory, it was either like midnight or 2 a.m. My brain tells me it was 2, but I could be wrong. But basically, once it would get so late, channels would just stop broadcasting shows. It would just be either like the White Fuzz or it'd be infomercials, just stuff like that. But yeah, there would be like no TV to watch after this time. But so after the national anthem plays, we then zoom out to reveal a man asleep in a chair in the living room. And while he is passed out, we see his dog, who is the only one awake in the whole house, begin to go to each room looking for bits of food to munch on. I will say, I think this is a really smart way to kind of introduce the family to us, is to have this dog kind of during the very beginning go to each family member. So it shows us, the audience, that this is our, this is going to be our core cast. This is what we're working with. And I think that was a really smart way to do that.
Yeah, I think by the way, it's 2:30. 2:30 was when the broadcast ended.
I did see that it was like when she starts talking to the TV, it's 2:37, and they believe that is kind of a shout out to room 237 from The Shining. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't think about that. I thought it was 2:37. I assumed 2:30 is when it cut off, and then we got a short break and then a national anthem for 5 minutes or so, something like that. I don't know. I don't remember the days of national anthems playing and TV cutting.
I do. I was pretty young, but I do remember.
Were they still doing that in the 90s?
Yeah, they still did it then. I remember, man, I don't really remember seeing it past maybe 7 years old, but yeah, it was a thing. It would be like the summertime when I was out of school and I could kind of stay up for unlimited amount of time, and a lot of the regular channels would just stop. They would do the national anthem thing, and they would show the statue, the monument, and then that would be it. But typically in my time, it was all infomercials after that.
Yeah, I was about to say, my earliest memories is, I guess there wasn't quite as much TV out there to play reruns of shows or to buy the rights of shows just to play reruns because there wasn't that many old rerunnable shows. But I know after, I would say probably around 2 a.m. until the morning time, 90% of channels was just infomercials
Yeah.
selling shit.
The
But
set it and forget it.
but wait, there's more.
So I'm going to take this time to go ahead and introduce our main cast and all of the members of the Freeling family. So first we have the dad who is seen asleep by the TV, and his name is Steve Freeling. Then we have his wife Diane Freeling, his teenage daughter Dana, young son Robbie, young daughter Carol Ann, and his beautiful golden retriever E-Buzz. I love the dog. I
Yeah.
love those dogs.
Yeah, golden retrievers are beautiful dogs. Smart too.
Now, so while E-Buzz goes from room to room, we see the young girl Carol Ann wake up and walk downstairs. She heads right for the TV, which we see is displaying the old white-looking static. Carol Ann has got to have the straightest damn bangs I've ever seen on a human being. It's like they put a fucking ruler and cut her hair on the ruler. Like, them things are on point. They're on point.
Wasn't a ruler. They had to use like
The bowl?
a bowl that fit her head perfectly.
Well, they nailed it, because them fucking things are straight.
Yeah, I don't get that because, as you know, in my childhood, Mom blessed me with a fucking bowl cut
Nah,
my entire childhood.
the
and
90s.
they could never get it straight.
Well,
Like,
a lot of
no-
people have that problem.
And no matter what, no matter who cut it, it would always, like, it wasn't like noticeably super fucked up, but it was never perfect, ever. I guess it's because I wasn't a movie star.
She had it right. So she sits down right in front of the television and begins to talk to someone we can't see. And we can tell by this conversation that this is pretty much the first time she is meeting this entity, I guess we would call it. But Carol Ann begins yelling at the TV, which wakes the rest of the family up, including her father, who is sitting right next to her. Steve looks back in confusion to see that his wife and kids are now all standing on the stairs looking at him and Carol Ann. I want to point this out before we go too much further, but I guess this is in the book. So Dana is not Diane's daughter, is her stepdaughter. And they do hint at this very slightly in the movie when later on when he meets with the paranormal investigators, he says, "My daughter Dana," and that is because that is his daughter from a previous marriage. Yeah, the reason that this kind of came out was because a lot of people for some reason, did the math.
She would have been 15
And the
when she
math,
got pregnant with her.
yeah, and people were like, "What the fuck?" And then they're like, "No."
Well, that happens. I mean, that's not like a never happens thing.
Yeah, basically they're like, no. Dana is his daughter from. This is why you also don't see Dana call Diane mom throughout any of the movie, because it's not her mom. But she is the mother to the younger kids. Yeah.
I didn't know there was a book.
Yeah, there's a novel version of this movie.
It was after the movie?
Yeah. It wasn't a book before.
Huh. I wonder if that was the intention when they made the movie.
Well, they obviously cut a lot of stuff out, and I'm sure it just got trimmed away.
Are you sure they cut some out? Because it seemed like they didn't cut much out of this movie.
There's probably could have been a 3-hour version somewhere.
Yeah, I will say, if my daughter did this, this would freak me the fuck out. Kids do some creepy shit.
They do.
Anybody who's been a parent that's had a kid around this age knows kids do some fucking creepy shit. Like, they'd be in their room talking, having a whole ass conversation with something that isn't there.
It's funny,
But this would have really freaked me out.
It's funny you bring that up, because I actually Googled the other day, because your kid talks to herself all the time. And I Googled, like, is it normal for a 5-year-old to talk to themselves? Apparently it's super normal, so don't worry. So we then jump to the next day and we get this overhead shot of this very large and brand new neighborhood in the valley of the Southern California mountains. And this is where our characters live and our story takes place. When I seen that, I thought nowadays a corporation would they'd build those houses, but they'd keep them and they would rent them out for like fucking $4,500 a month or some shit. Because you
Yeah.
notice in this, like the company built back then, they would build these whole neighborhoods and they would sell all of these houses. That doesn't happen anymore. They just keep them and rent them because they can make more money in the long run, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, and the property value is going to go up too from the time they built it. So,
It's weird
yeah.
just to see how things change.
Yeah, I mean, even when we were kids, that was how it happened. They would build houses and sell them.
Yep.
All the houses in the neighborhood, once they all sold up, that was it. The developers were out of there.
This is exactly what happened to our neighborhood. Our neighborhood was essentially built by a developer who decided to keep 90% of the houses and rent them out. So, next up, we see a sweaty, out of shape middle aged man riding a kid's bike while holding a case of beer. He soon arrives at a very nice 2-story home where he drops the bike and runs inside. We then see that this is the Freeling's house and Steve is having a bunch of friends over to watch the big game. Later that night, we see Robbie and Carol Ann, who share a room, getting ready for bed when a thunderstorm rolls in. This, for some reason, makes Robbie really nervous as he stares out his window at the large, creepy tree next to the house. After Diane puts the kids to bed, we see her and Steve laying on the bed smoking some devil's lettuce, while Diane tells this story of how she used to sleepwalk when she was a kid, and she once walked 4 blocks and laid down in the backseat of a stranger's car. The guy drove all the way to work before he discovers her, where she then wakes up screaming. People then call the cops and take the confused man downtown, and Diane's father had her examined for what she says bruises and hickeys. She thinks this is funny. I'm like, good God, this is a terrible story.
You know what my thoughts were when she was telling that story? In real life, he would have heard this story 500 times at this point. Like when you were married that long, there ain't no way he's never heard this story.
Yeah, good point. Good point. We then jump back on over to the kids' room where Robbie is laying there, like staring out of his window, where we then see that he's not just scared of the creepy tree, he also has an issue with a clown doll that is sitting on a chair across from his bed. The infamous clown doll, I would say, is probably one of the most recognizable things from this movie, despite having such little screen time.
Yeah, it does have and it's the scene. It's the scene later on when the beginning of the actual climax. But yeah, fuck that clown. Like even scary movie aside, why in the hell would you have that clown and why would you put it in a rocking chair at the end of your bed? That's awful.
Well, funny thing is, so Steven Spielberg put this in the movie because when he was a kid, he was scared of a big tree outside of his window and a clown doll in his room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This doll actually a couple of years ago sold for over $650,000 on auction.
Because I found that it's currently sitting in a Las Vegas, like, resort, like one of those casino hotels.
Huh.
Currently it's there, so I'm wondering if they are the ones who bought it.
I don't know. I didn't. I know. I don't know. A couple of years ago when it sold, I remember seeing it, and then knowing we were gonna do this movie, I quickly looked it up to see how much it sold for. I didn't see who bought it, but those casinos also, it may be leased out to them.
Oh, that's
Whoever
true.
whoever the collector is, like a lot of museums and places like that will actually get stuff on lease and hold it and have a contract for a certain amount of years.
So Robbie finally gives in to his fear and goes to get his father. Steve takes him back to his room to put him back to bed, and this is where we find out that Steve works for the company who built the neighborhood, which becomes important later on. We jump ahead a few hours and we see that both the children are now in the bed with Steve and Diane. We hear the national anthem going off again and the TV turns to the white static. And just as this happens, Carol Ann wakes up and sits in front of the television. She then reaches her hand out when suddenly, like a ghost hand reaches out from the TV screen and touches her. We then see the smoky figure come out of the screen and begin to hover over Steve and Diane while they sleep. After a moment of this, we then see a streak of white light shoot from the TV and into the wall above the bed, causing the whole bed to violently shake, waking Steve, Diane, and Robbie. The camera then pans to Carol Ann, where she says the famous line, "They're here." The next morning, we see Steve on the phone with someone talking about the earthquake, which this person has no idea what he is talking about. We also see that there is a construction crew digging a pool in the backyard, and this is the scene where I kind of noticed Diane is attractive. This was kind of the first time I'd watched a movie older, and I was like, I see why Steve married her. She's
Wow.
cute.
I remember finding her extremely attractive whenever I was a child. Mainly the scene, the rotating room scene where she is wearing just the panties
Well,
and
I
the
found her
jersey.
legs attractive back then.
Yeah, that's one of the scenes that actually sticks in my mind that I always remembered. The only non-horror scene
Well,
in the movie.
for the longest time, man, I had a problem where no matter how good looking the girl was, if she had the 80s hair, that just killed it for me.
She didn't have an awful 80s hair.
She doesn't have an awful one. I'll give you that. But back then, everyone's hair was so fucking fluffy and dry, man. Like,
That's what was in.
it is. And I'm so glad that that's not in right now.
I was talking to Brooke about, because she likes this big fucking giant bug-eyed sunglasses, and I put up a fight every time she tries to get any. I'm like, they're huge, like they're fucking massive, and I was like, 30 years down the road, you're gonna see them. You're not gonna see anybody wear them for like 30 years because they're gonna go out of style, and then you're gonna see an old picture of yourself, and you're gonna say, "Damn, those were fucking awful." That's exactly what happens.
Yeah, I see Diane in a different light now, though. So we then see all three kids sitting at the breakfast table while Diane serves them waffles. Robbie then goes to take a drink of his milk when suddenly the bottom of his glass explodes. The milk splatters all over Dana, and she gets pretty pissed because she has class in 20 minutes. If you've got class that soon, why the fuck are you still at the house? Is the school across the street?
It's not, because
Like
we
a-
see what's across the street.
Yeah, I mean, if I gotta be in my seat in school in 20 minutes, I'm definitely not still at the house.
Yeah, I'm feeling she's probably late to school.
I would assume. As the family all gets up from the table to leave for school and work, Robbie notices his spoon and fork are both very bent.
I think she's just an angsty teenager.
Oh,
I
she
bet
is.
you she wasn't even close to being late for school.
She just
School
wanted to be
was like an
mad.
hour and 20 minutes away. She was just trying to be pissed about the milk.
So this next scene, though, is I maybe it's just because of how old the movie is, because times are different now, but the next scene, Dana is getting her bike, and she's getting ready to leave for school. When all of a sudden, all these fucking construction workers that are like building this pool are fucking catcalling her.
Yeah.
She's 16.
Yeah, they ain't no fucking way. I don't care what the times were. I would be okay with these fucking old, like 40-year-old fucking dudes trying to catcall my 16-year-old daughter. And Diane sees it, and she's kind of just smiles about it. Like,
Yeah.
she kind of
Yeah,
just
whatever.
smiles about it, and it's like, yeah, she can hold her own.
Oh, I'd
No.
flip the fuck out.
Yeah.
I'd kick every one of them. I'd be like, you're not fucking ever coming back
Somebody
here.
else would be digging that fucking pool.
Yeah. And then like a little later on, I guess he's like the foreman. He gets caught in the kitchen window eating the goddamn food.
Yeah, it's literally like, I don't know, 2 minutes after this. Yeah, he's in the kitchen, like drinking her coffee out of her cup and stealing the food that's still in the pot that she's cooking.
Well,
I'm like,
I think she's cooking something for like later on because it was like chili or something. It
Yeah.
wasn't breakfast. And
he dips into
and
it.
he's eating it while it's cooking. I would be fucking furious if somebody that I hired to work at my house did that.
Yeah. You would think this would be like her son doing something like this.
That would make more sense.
Yeah, this is d- fire these motherfuckers. They're awful.
Yeah. By the way, the foreman guy, he actually, it was way later on, like he was in his 60s, but he got murdered by somebody with an axe. I found that out earlier.
But damn,
Yeah.
he definitely repent for
And he's part of the curse.
eating that chili.
Mhm. So when Diane walks back into the kitchen, she notices that all the chairs have been pulled away from the breakfast table. She asks Carol Ann if she did this as like a joke, but she responds no, and after a brief pause, she places the chairs back under the table. She then walks back over by the sink, and when she turns around, she is shocked to find the chairs now stacked on top of the table and Carol Ann still sitting on the counter next to where she put her. Diane looks at Carol Ann and says, TV people, and Carol Ann says, yep. She then asks Carol Ann if she can see them, and she says no, and then asks her mother if she can see them, which she responds with no, with an interesting grin on her face. So, this is a cool shot. I want to talk about it real quick. So, this was all done in one continuous shot, which is what makes the shot really cool. And how they did it was they had 2 sets of chairs, and they had the one set that was, there at the table normal, and they had pre-built the stacked version and, like, glued it together. And when the camera pans with Diane when she gets under the sink, a bunch of dudes ran in, pulled the other chairs out, and another group of guys ran with the already glued up chairs and sat them on the table and ran away.
Yeah, this had to be a set built house, because they had to have like a pull away wall for that. I think it's the wall. It would have to be the wall behind.
I don't know, because the movie was primarily, almost all of it was filmed on that Roxbury Street. So I didn't really come across where they filmed any studio shots.
I wonder if maybe they just filmed that. I just don't know how you could get that whole stack of chairs, because there's a wall right behind them. There's a small doorway, but you wouldn't be able to get all those chairs through that doorway. I mean, that's not to say they didn't make modifications to the house during filming. That's very possible. This scene always stood out to me. Obviously, this the first scene you really see anything. But I think it really stood out to me because, for one, how quick it is. And you can tell it's a continuous shot. But what really, really impacted me was how quiet it was. Like, if you were going to get somebody to run over and stack those chairs real quick, that would be one thing. If I was Diane in this situation, I would not only be super creeped out knowing that happened that fast, but the fact that it was silent.
Yeah.
Like, there ain't no way you could stack something like that silent.
So later on in the evening, we see Steve arrive home from work, and as he gets out of his car, Diane quickly runs outside and grabs him, pulling him inside to show him something. Once they arrive inside, Diane takes him to the kitchen, where we see that she has a circle drawn on the ground with an arrow pointed towards the breakfast table. She then takes a table chair and places it in the circle and tells Steve to just watch. After a moment, we start to see the chair shake around a bit, and then it suddenly slides across the kitchen all on its own. It then comes to a stop at the other end, and Diane jumps in celebration as Steve holds his hand over his mouth in disbelief. Steve walks over to the chair to examine it, finding nothing unusual, when Diane places Carol Ann in the circle and shouts for Steve to stay at the other end. We then see a very hungry and uninterested Carol Ann slide across the kitchen floor on her butt while Steve watches in wonderment.
I would be a little pissed if she did this to our kid. I would be like, look, for one, I don't get why she's so excited. Like, she's obviously really bored at home because she is way overly excited. I would be kind of concerned. My first thought would be, it's either ghosts, but ghosts aren't normally this obvious. So is there like some scientific anomaly happening here? Like that?
Yeah.
Like what the fuck is going on? So if it's like a scientific, some type of anomaly that we don't understand, Why would you put our fucking daughter, a person, there for this to happen? That was really thought her reaction was really strange.
Well, what I love about this scene, though, is we immediately see two very different attitudes when it comes to this unexplainable phenomenon. And I think that that is realistic because not everyone, that there are a lot of different people that this would be exciting to, and other people that this would scare the shit out of them. And I think it makes for it makes the character more real. I think it is more realistic as a character.
Yeah, I would be internally excited that something probably paranormal just happened, but at the same time, I'd be very concerned, especially having kids in the house. Like, if something can move shit like that, there's no limits to what they can do. So, yeah, I get feeling like the internal excitement that something exciting just happened, but she gets a little too excited. She's like a fucking cheerleader. She's like jumping up and down.
So later on, we see Steve and Diane kind of debating this whole thing. And while this is going on, Robbie is laying in bed, once again scared by the storm and creepy tree outside of his window. As he begins to count the time between lightning strikes and thunder, we see the tree suddenly come alive and burst through the window, reaching in for Robbie. The two kids both begin screaming as two giant tree hands reach in and grab Robbie, pulling him out. Steve and Diane burst into the room just in time to see Robbie being pulled outside, which causes Steve to jump into action and run outside to help. Steve and Diane attempt to run out of the back door when the tree uses one of its limbs to barricade the door shut. Meanwhile, Carol Ann is still upstairs alone and scared as her closet door opens and a bright light begins to shine as the door swings open. As Carol Ann sits up in bed, stunned at the sight, we then start to see toys being sucked into the bright light coming from the closet. Outside, Steve and Diane run around the house into the backyard, still trying to get to Robbie, when suddenly a fucking black tornado appears in the sky next to their house. As Steve continues to try to reach the tree of death, Carol Ann's room starts being sucked into the closet of bright light. Dude, how powerful is this fucking poltergeist where it manifested not even a regular tornado, it's like this evil tornado that drops down literally in their backyard.
Yeah, I think this is a little more than like poltergeist activity. This is on another level. This whole scene is one of the ones that really stuck with me. I think anybody who watched this movie a long time ago, this is probably one of the ones that sticks out. For one, that kid just got kidnapped by a fucking tree.
The giant tree hands? That's wild.
and then not only that, as if that's not horrifying enough, the tree is fucking eating him.
Yeah.
Like he is up to his shoulders, like shoulder down, is inside the mouth of this tree that is now fucking eating him. I mean, somebody get the goddamn Roundup. You should have killed this.
Chainsaw, fire.
Something.
I can never see this scene without it reminding me of the Scary Movie 2 where the giant weed leaf gets him and rolls him into a joint and smokes him. Man, and he's like, they bust into the room and they're like, "Are you okay?" And he's like, "Do you want to hit this?"
They take jabs at this movie a couple times.
This the first watch I did at the beginning of the week, I actually had forgotten how many jabs that movie takes at this movie.
The whole scene I mentioned of her and the panties and the jersey.
Well, there's the clown and it's his penis though.
Yeah. Yeah, this is one of the main targets on that one. One thing I did want to bring up, and it seems like a very, very small thing. So right before this scene, they go to the neighbor's house to ask the neighbors if they had ever experienced anything, and it's a really weird scene.
It is.
I'm surprised they didn't cut it, because if I was the neighbor, I would have thought they were stoned. Like, I'm
They're
pretty
kind
sure
of acting
pretty
like
sure
they're.
they smoked a J before they went
Yeah.
over there to ask
And
the
what's up
neighbor.
with the
That's
mosquitoes
what I was gonna bring up, so because I feel like it was done
on
so
purpose?
intentional.
Yeah, I couldn't find
Um,
anything on it.
it almost seems like whatever's going on at this house is not doesn't it's not just in the house or on the property that it has influence over, because they are getting, like, unusually attacked, and they make it a point for the neighbor to come out and say they're not bothering him at all.
Well, he
Like, he's
claims he's
never had.
never been bitten by it,
Yeah.
which is weird in
But
itself.
then he asked his son, and his son's like, I don't know." Like, they're clearly not messing with him either. But the scene after this, they are, like, tore up. Like, I've never seen that many mosquito bites from a 2-minute interaction. So it seems like they put that on purpose to kinda show. I don't know if it's this poltergeist presence having influence on not
Bugs?
not just not just their property, but the whole neighborhood.
Mm.
Because you know, like, what you find out at the end of this movie, it's not just their house, it's the entire neighborhood. But I thought that was really interesting. I don't know if you had anything on that.
I thought the same thing and I didn't find anything.
I think it was clearly put in there on purpose. Like,
It's weird.
that scene serves no other purpose other than that. They make the mosquitoes a very big point, and the shot after that is about the mosquitoes too.
So, anyway, back upstairs, Carol Ann tries to hold onto her headboard to avoid the closet vacuum, but unfortunately, she isn't strong enough, and we see Carol Ann fly across the room and disappear into the light. Outside, the tree then opens a mouth in its trunk and begins to eat Robbie whole. Starting with his legs, Robbie tries to break free of the tree's grasp as he yells for Steve to save him. The tree then starts swallowing him as Steve climbs up its branches and is able to pull him free and climb back down to the ground just as the eye of the tornado passes over them, ripping the tree from its roots and sucking it up into the sky as it dissipates. Steve and Diane then remember Carol Ann is still upstairs and run to see if she is okay. When they swing the door open, they are in disbelief as they find the bedroom completely empty. They run into the room after noticing everything has been pulled into the closet. They begin to throw toys and furniture and stuff out of their way in a frantic search for their young daughter. Once they finally get the closet mostly clear, they find a small body covered in a pink blanket who they believe to be an injured Carol Ann. And as they remove the cover, all they find is the creepy clown doll just sitting there.
Man, poor Robbie just got kidnapped and fucking eaten, almost fully eaten by a tree. And as a sibling, seeing this shot, you really feel bad for him because he's standing here and nobody is like asking him if he's all right, anything. He's just standing there, covered in like
Mud.
tree goop, tree snot, I guess, from being eaten, and he's just stunned.
He also has his two front teeth are adult teeth in a kid mouth. He's got some fucking big front teeth.
Yeah, it's
Like that's like all I can
weird.
focus on when he's talking is how big those teeth are. Man, you
Yeah,
got some extra large teeth, bear boy.
we all get our first adult teeth. Unfortunately, his was ingrained in cinema history.
So the family is briefly relieved, believing that Carol Ann must be hiding in another part of the house. Steve, Diane, and Dana then all split up and begin searching the home, but unfortunately, Carol Ann is nowhere to be found. As the Freelings begin to panic over Carol Ann, Robbie then starts to hear his sister screaming "Mommy" from the TV. Robbie quickly alerts his mother of his discovery, and at first Diane is relieved to have found her. That is until she realizes her young daughter is yelling for her from the TV. So after a few days, the Freelings decide that they need some outside help. And we see Steve having a meeting with some local paranormal investigators. Steve kind of gives them like a brief rundown of the situation, and they agree to come to the house for like a more serious investigation. So, back at the house, we see our 3 investigators arrive. We have the leader of this group, Dr. Lesh, the cameraman, Ryan, and the photographer, Dr. Casey. They enter the house and ask the standard questions about what's been going on. Then they start asking about Robbie and Carol Ann's bedroom, where Steve informs them that they don't go in and they keep the door locked.
Man, watching this, like, the more you get into it, the more you realize, like, Insidious completely stole so much from this. Like, I remember, I believe in I believe it's in Insidious that the kid goes missing for a long time, and they don't go to the police or anything. Like, they don't report their kid missing, anything like that. And then they bring in paranormal investigators, which
Mhm.
is this woman with years of experience, and then her tech team with the
Mhm.
cameras. Like,
They
they
combine technology and psychic powers
they
into one.
they couldn't just, I mean, God, it's like they didn't even try to cut. Like, I wonder if James Wan, I'm pretty sure he wrote the Insidious, if he did this purposely, or if he's just a big Poltergeist fan and just self-consciously wrote the whole fucking story, but instead made the 2 helpers goofy as fuck, which I fucking hate.
I
The
actually
worst
like them.
part of the fucking movie.
Um, I what blows my mind about it was Insidious was such a big hit, and, like, I heard nobody talk about how it was like a Poltergeist ripoff.
Yeah, I
And it
mean,
made me wonder, is there just that many people that haven't seen Poltergeist? Because that's weird.
I've seen Poltergeist and I never put it together. Like, I watching Insidious, I never put that together because it doesn't feel like the same type of movie. There's just something about Poltergeist that is good to me, and something about Insidious that feels like every other fucking paranormal movie that came out
Yeah.
around that same time.
All those movies are just, to me, they're just really over polished. It's like they had all this money and they spent all of it. And, you know, in my opinion, they could have probably done some things more with the story than it's just like one of those just overly spent movies. It just had too much money.
So one thing in Insidious that's different is they can't hear. They can't talk to their son. Is that right? They can't. I think there's some, like, blinking lights, and the mom eventually figures it out, or something like that, but they can't actually, like, hear his voice and speak back and forth
Yeah,
with him.
I don't think
I
they can.
I think that is something that Poltergeist did that was really different, that I think is really good for the movie, because for 2 reasons. As a parent, and I've seen this movie in the last 5 years, but I don't know if it's having a child this age, but as a parent, it adds a whole new element of horror to be able to hear your child speaking in the house, but you can't get to them. Like, you have no idea what the fuck happened to them, but you can hear them clearly. Like, that's super, super scary. But then the idea of this girl getting lost in this dimension, and she's alive, but she's kinda haunting her own house
Mhm.
and not knowing how to get out of it. And it's a really, I don't think any other movie's ever done it where somebody has been haunting their own house. Like, she's like a ghost. They hear her voice, but she's not a dead ghost, she's alive. So this is really interesting.
One thing I really like, and it's really apparent in this kind of chunk of the film, you know, Craig T. Nelson, who plays Steve, does such a good job at playing an exhausted dad that's just stressed out, exhausted, doesn't know what to do. He really pulls that off. A lot of actors, can do a pretty decent job at that. But when you look in his face, especially when he is first meeting the investigators at their office, he looks exhausted in his face. And that's hard. You can act exhausted, but to act and look exhausted, great job.
He literally so dedicated, he slept on set.
He stayed
He's
awake
like
for 2
he's like,
days.
"I want you guys to wake me up and say action. Just wake me up. I'll lift my head off the desk, have everything ready, shoot it."
So they go upstairs, and this is when Ryan says something pretty funny. He claims that he once got actual footage of a ghost moving a toy car 7 feet across a linoleum floor in the span of 7 hours. Which Steve, considering what he has experienced in the past week, scoffs at. Steve then opens the door, and the investigators are shocked by what they see. Inside the room, we see the lights is still bursting from the closet doorway, and we got lamps, toys, books, all of it just spinning around in the air in the room. Another thing that I just noticed for the first time ever is the clown doll is riding the bed like one of those mechanical bulls. Never seen that before.
Yeah. So, I hated the shit floating around the room. I hated the way they shot it. It felt very, when they shoot movies in 3D and they have these things that they
Something
want
just
to
doesn't look right.
yeah, they want them to pop out to you for the 3D experience. I don't know why, but just this scene they shot that way. It's like totally like you could put 3D glasses on and be like, it's like a 3D Easter egg or
Well,
something.
it's because every time you see a 3D movie, there's always some kind of gimmick that comes with the 3D object. And in this one, we see the book sits in front of her and flips open its pages. And then we got the lamp that screws into itself and turns on. Yeah,
And it's
it's
the record
gimmicky.
record
Yeah,
player playing. Yeah,
it's
I don't
gimmicky.
know why they put that in this. And I'd asked you before we started this, did they digitally change some stuff when they remastered it? Like they did the old Star Wars. Like when you watch newer copies of the older Star Wars, they go in and they change certain things. I don't remember this. This is one of the things, and I've seen this movie plenty of times, but I don't remember hating the shit going around in the room so much.
Hmm. So, next up, the investigators are at the dining room table meeting with the Freelings. Dr. Lesh is visibly shaken by what she has seen so far, and while they're having this conversation, things keep moving randomly around on the table. This prompts Ryan to look around for some kind of like trick to what he is seeing. They then get on the subject of the missing Carol Ann, and Lesh would like to see how Diane is able to contact her daughter, who seems to be stuck inside the home somehow. Diane cuts the TV on and begins calling for Carol Ann, and we then hear a synthesized version of Carol Ann's voice. As Diane speaks to her daughter, the investigators gather around the TV, completely bewildered by what they are seeing. Carol Ann mentions all she can see is this bright light, where Dr. Lesh jumps up and instructs Diane to tell her to stay away from the light no matter what. We then see a flashing bright light appear above Diane and Lesh, where multiple pairs of watches and jewelry drop into the living room floor. Carol Ann then says that someone is here with her and yells for help. They then hear running sounds in the room above them, and Diane feels the spirit of Carol Ann pass through her. While the group is celebrating this interaction with the little girl, they are quickly interrupted by a growl and a large gust of wind coming from upstairs, when suddenly there's an explosion of wind that throws everything and everyone to the floor. Dr. Lesh decides to go look inside Carol Ann's closet, and just as she starts up the stairs, Dr. Casey comes running down holding his abdomen, claiming something took a bite out of him while inside the bedroom. He then pulls up his shirt to reveal a very bruised area on his ribs. Ronnie says, "You got bit?" Oh, wow.
Wow. I put that in my notes too. Robbie's wow is just
Oh, wow.
it
It's so funny.
it's perfect. I
It
think it's the
is.
funniest thing in this fucking movie.
It's
It's like
great.
the way they shot it. I don't know if it was horrible acting or great acting. I just can't put my finger on it, but something about that Oh, wow.
It's
Like,
like that same acting you used to get during, like,
commercial?
toy commercial, like,
Yeah.
commercials for kids, like, "The new racetrack," and he's like, "Oh, wow."
Or like a McDonald's Happy Meal commercial in
Yeah,
the 80s. Like,
yeah.
yeah, I made note of that too. I thought that was the funniest thing in the movie for some reason, and I can't quite figure out why. You know, I don't know if there's something wrong with my kids, but my kids don't have a smell. Is that like a
Maybe it's a mom thing.
no, she's like, well, no, the dad comes up and starts smelling it too. Like Steve is like
So does
smelling it
Doctor
and he's like,
Lesh.
oh my God.
He's never even met
And,
her.
you know, I'm like, because she's like, I can tell she passed through me. I can smell her. And she's like, it, it's like Dewey Cox when he's smelling the shit. And he finally can smell and he's like, I can smell again. It smells awful. And he's like crying. He's so happy. I'm like, man, I just, if this happened to me and one of my kids passed through me, I wouldn't be like, oh, it smells like my kid.
Your kid would smell like mac and cheese and a Coraline DVD.
Yeah, definitely
uh,
the mac and cheese. Sure.
so after this, Dr. Lesh announces that they will be spending the night at the Freeling's house for further investigation. So later on, when pretty much everyone is asleep in the living room, Ryan and Dr. Casey are still awake, observing all of these like gadgets and video monitors. Casey informs Ryan that he is heading to the kitchen to get something to eat. So to me, this next scene's weird. Casey goes into the Freeling's kitchen and he pulls out this huge steak from the fridge. And then he gets out a pan to cook it. Who the fuck goes into a stranger's house and decides to cook their like expensive big ass steak at like 3 a.m.?
I don't know.
That's
That is
weird.
weird. Maybe we missed the part where he was like, I'm hungry. And they're like, well, we got a $50 steak in the fridge if you want to pull it out.
Well,
Like a, it's like a big ass fucking T-bone. Or maybe it's
I don't know my steaks
I
like
I
that.
I do. I just it's the steak I don't like, and it's bothering me now.
Well, another thing that's weird about it is everyone is asleep in the room right next door. And it's not like these, the kitchen and the living room have a door, it's open. He's gonna cook on a stove a steak while everyone is like 20 feet away from him sleeping.
Yeah.
It's hard to cook a steak silently, and everyone's gonna smell the steak. This is
This
just weird.
well, this whole setup is weird because for the next 5 minutes, we slowly go to every character at some point, and everybody's whispering, but everybody's awake at the same time. Like they literally go. They have a scene of every character at some point, and they're all whispering to each other, but everybody's awake. Why are they whispering?
I don't I
So
don't
it's
know.
really
Maybe
strange to shoot a movie that way too. You know what? This has happened again. It's the ASMR got me. Like this whole scene, I was about to fall asleep. I'm like, damn, all this whispering. Like, why'd they shoot this? Everybody's awake.
maybe they were just trying to be polite for the other people that were trying to sleep.
Got this
Uh,
fucking assistant ghost hunter in here trying to cook a
Cook a
steak,
steak.
ripping his fucking face off. You got like heart to heart conversations going on. Why are you whispering? This was 100% the moment in the movie that the captions came on.
Oh yeah, good point.
I normally turn them on in the beginning. I'd forgot this one. And I'm like, well, this is why I turned the captions on.
Well, I turned them on so I could make sure I got everyone's name correctly, because apparently where I get my cast info is not always on point.
Or maybe sometimes you just throw a name in there that didn't exist.
Well, I will say that a lot of the cast list, they got the one of the investigators. I can't remember what they called him, but I paid attention in the movie this time, and Dr. Lesh specifically calls him Dr. Casey. And I was like, I wrote it down immediately. And I was like,
He's a doctor?
apparently,
He's an assistant
the assistant doctor.
ghost hunter? And he's a doctor?
I don't know.
Wow. Where'd he get a doctorate in?
I don't know.
He get his doctorate in like liberal arts?
Mm. So he gets out this steak and he just flops it right on the counter, which is
Who
also
does
weird.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's weird.
And he then notices the steak is like slithering across the counter on its own. He just is like, what the fuck is happening here? He then shines his flashlight at it, and all of a sudden, the meat just starts coming out of the center of it, I guess. And it's like a lot of meat, like more meat than that steak would be. It's really creepy looking. I will tell you how they did it. They actually cut like a like a very thin opening in the grout of the tile, and an effects person got into the cabinet and they actually hooked two pieces of wire to the bottom of the steak, and the guy under there just kind of made it move, like he said, like a caterpillar.
It it's a ribeye steak. That's what I was going for.
Oh.
The fatty, big juicy looking, but way too fatty steaks.
Mm.
And they cut a hole in a fucking ribeye. You're telling me to make that scene happen?
Yeah, so at the end of the counter they cut a hole and they actually just pushed a bunch of like ground cut up,
Like ground beef?
yeah, like
Not
no,
even
it
the
was like
same.
cut up steak, or it was some kind of meat. They just kind of pushed it through.
They went and bought the ribeye, and then they bought the strip steak. It's already cut up.
Probably. Casey then spits out the chicken wing he had in his mouth, only to realize it is covered in maggots.
Did he take their chicken wing too out of
He
the
did.
fridge?
Yeah, he ate their Cheez-Its, their chicken wing, and that big ass steak.
Yeah, somebody's been smoking the reefer with this
Yeah.
guy, and they're probably regretting it now.
He's a doctor in horticulture. That's what he is. So this freaks him out pretty bad, and he runs to the Freeling's bathroom to wash his mouth out. And as he is washing his face, we see a bright light above him turn red and his skin start to sizzle. His cheek then splits open and he begins oozing blood. And then we see the scene change, and we are now looking at a very fake looking head of Dr. Casey. It's pretty rough. He then begins to start ripping off the skin on his face, which looks really good after a couple tears of his face. It looks great then.
Yeah, that I noticed you had mentioned this a couple days ago,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't think that it looked bad. I do agree that the head was obviously fake as fuck before he starts tearing away at it.
It looks great.
But once he starts tearing into it, man, for the times, for the early 80s, it looked pretty good. It was fucking creepy. And, it must have been some of that Spielberg magic of how they still got this rated a PG-13 with a man ripping his fucking face off in the movie.
PG-13 did not exist at the time.
What would it get rated?
It got rated PG.
Well, maybe that's PG.
Yeah, that's another reason.
Don't listen to the internet. The internet lies to you.
That's another reason why Spielberg cut out a lot of the dark stuff, is because he was scared it would get rated R. Because back then it was only R and PG. So he cut out some of the other stuff.
Think about all the amazing shit that we brought up a million times in the Friday the 13th and the Nightmare on Elm Street that's had to get cut so it could get a fucking R rating. And this movie pulled off a PG with the man ripping his whole fucking face off.
Yeah.
That was Spielberg magic.
Oh, I'm sure he had pool in it. Yeah, so he rips his skin off. We see his facial bones, his teeth, his eye sockets. Looks pretty good. But pretty much after he rips most of his face off, he realizes that this is just a mind trick and his face is completely intact. We then jump back to the living room where Ryan is not really paying attention to the equipment. We then suddenly see the energy reader thing go off the charts. Then one of the living room cameras begins to move on its own, facing up towards the top of the stairs. We see a thick mist and bright light appear from upstairs. Casey sees this and alerts Ryan as they both stare in disbelief. We then see a semi-transparent being floating down to the living room. By now, everyone is awake and shocked by what they are seeing. Steve runs over to protect his wife and son. I guess he said, fuck Dana. There is then a quick flash of lightning around the room as the being disappears into nothing. So Dr. Lesh plays back the videotape of the event they just saw and realizes that on the video, the images of the light are much easier to make out, and they realize that this is not just one ghost they are dealing with, it is many.
I thought that was really cool that the camera picked up what they didn't see. You know, they seen this light come down the stairs, almost in the shape of a person. But then they checked the cameras and it picked up all the shit that they couldn't see with their actual eyes. I don't know why. I thought that was like something kind of like you would see in real life, like a
Well,
ghost shit you see in real life sometimes where a camera will pick up something that you didn't see. One thing I never noticed though about those lights is if you look really close, they kind of look like early settlers. They look like they just jumped off the Columbus boat.
yeah, so there's a reason for that, and they actually talk about it in the second one. In that spot, there is actually a mass grave that was dug, and it was a group of kind of a cult that believed that they had reached the end times, and they buried themselves alive. I
That
bel
sounds like some really bad sequel shit.
Well, no, this was actually the story, the original story for this, and this was one of the things that Stephen King, Steven Spielberg had taken out because he wanted that PG-13 rating. But this villain, so this storyline, a lot of this stuff that was cut from this story ended up becoming the sequel story. In the sequel, the bad guy, the beast in this one, he actually goes after Caroline again in the second one, and this is where we actually find out who he is in the second one. So he's the villain also there, but we actually learn the backstory.
Mm,
Yeah.
I don't know if I like that. I
Mm.
like him being just scary unknown demon that you don't know where it came from. The depths of hell, something just naturally evil. Was it a person? We don't know.
So the next day, Robbie and Ebuzz are sent away to his grandmother's house, and Dr. Lesh gathers up all of the evidence to take back to her lab for review. She then informs Diane that she is leaving Ryan behind to stay at the house with the family while she goes to find someone that can really help with their situation. And also, Dr. Marty Casey will not be returning because he's a little bitch. Her words, not mine.
Yeah, but she's gonna come back. So don't worry. I'm like, try not to worry. How the fuck is Diane's not gonna worry? Like her fucking child's like kidnapped and now she knows into this like ghost world. Her fucking house is like throwing people around. Shit's going crazy. How in the fuck would you not worry?
Well, I think she just means like, don't worry, I'm not going to abandon you. Like, I'm going to still try to help.
Well, she says like, well, no. She says, she makes her statement like, I'm not abandoning you. And then she says, like, it'll be a couple days. Try not to worry. Just relax. Like, basically telling her until we
Yeah,
get back, try not to.
there's
Like,
no word,
like
not worrying.
how are you not gonna worry?
So we would then see Steve's boss, Mr. Teague, who is played by the wonderful James Karen, who you would recognize from the Return of the Living Dead movies, which I personally love. But Mr. Teague is worried about Steve missing so much work. We find out that Steve has told his boss that his whole family has the flu, but Teague thinks that this may be a lie and that Steve, who is their number one salesman, is actually looking to leave the company and go work for a competitor. So after expressing his concern to Steve over losing him, he asked if he would be interested in going for a short ride to see something. So Teague takes Steve up to this big hill on the edge of the neighborhood. Where they're fixing to build, and he begins to apologize for not making Steve a partner in the company years ago, but is now offering to give Steve a large home on the top of this hill overlooking the whole valley if he agrees to stay at the company. While Steve is thinking about it, we notice that there is a cemetery located on this very spot where the company is planning to build. Steve asks how they will build here with the cemetery in the way, and Teague informs him that they will just move it like they did before. Steve gets upset when he is told that there used to be bodies buried where his house now sits and he was never informed of it. So fast forward a few days and we see that Dr. Lesh is back, but this time she has brought some help. And this is where we meet our psychic, a very short lady named Tangina Barons. And we find out that Dr. Lush has used Tangina many times to successfully rid other homes of hauntings.
And poor Steve, 42% of sales.
Yeah.
This is at least 1,000 houses. I mean, this neighborhood's massive. If it's not 1,000, it's got to be very, very close. This guy should be fucking mega rich.
Yeah,
Like,
he should have a
if
bigger
you're a
house.
real estate agent and you have sold 42%, that's 1,000, you've sold over 400 of these houses that are really nice houses.
What do you say, $70 million he's made them?
Yeah, but I didn't catch the exact number he said
I think it was
they
70
made.
million.
Yeah, and he should be having a huge chunk of that in
Should not be driving a
his
station wagon.
commissions. Yeah, his commissions should be enough where he would be a by far multi-millionaire. Probably he should probably have, if they made 70 million, at least 10, 20 million. The fact that they didn't make him partners before is pretty shitty.
Yeah.
And then they're going to take him out of this house that was built on a cemetery and give him another one that's built on a new cemetery. How many cemeteries is in this area?
I don't know if it was just one big cemetery or if it was multiple. I don't really specify. But as they are walking through the Freeling's house, you can see that Steve thinks this is total bullshit. He's very skeptical of this, like, 4-foot tall psychic lady. So while walking into the living room, she gets this feeling in her chest and immediately looks to the room upstairs. So she quickly takes off in that direction, leaving everyone else down in the living room, and this is where Steve brings up his dissatisfaction with the help Dr. Lesh brought her. Dr. Lesh then explains her successful record when it comes to ridding homes from hauntings. Tangina then yells down to Steve, wondering why the bedroom door is locked. Steve closes his eyes and stands silent for a moment. Diane then yells at Steve, who claims he was trying to answer her with his mind. When Tangina then yells down that she basically could read his mind, she just doesn't like when people use trick answers.
I'd be impressed.
Yeah.
That
think
would have me
everybody would.
sold.
Lesh then tells her that they believe the bedroom is the heart of the house, when Tangina responds that the house has many hearts.
And I love the lady who plays Tangina. She plays in quite a few different horror related stuff, movies. I think she really was like barely over 4 foot tall.
She's very short.
I think maybe she was 4.5 foot tall. She was in a really, really good episode of Tales from the Crypt. I don't know if you remember it.
I remember her being in a couple of small things like that, I want to say.
Yeah, she was in the episode where the lady calls into it's like a psychiatrist that's on a radio station, and he specializes in like kids and bad kids. And she calls in, and he goes out to her house, and the kid's like up in the attic, and it's really weird. Ends up being a really good story.
She has like a very like recognizable look and voice.
Yeah.
Yeah, she used to be in a lot of stuff.
She plays this type of character really, really good.
Mm-hmm. So later on, Tangina informs Diane that Carol Ann is still alive and inside the house, and that in order to get her back, Diane must listen to everything she tells her to do. Tangina then gathers everyone around and begins explaining that Carol Ann is basically stuck in the ghost world, and the ghosts are attracted to her because she is still alive, and it reminds them of the feeling of when they were alive. Now, these ghosts are so distracted by Carol Ann's life force that they don't notice the door to the next life that is waiting on them. So Carol Ann, with the help of Diane, must guide them to this door in order for them to finally be at rest. But there is also a terrible presence in there with her that is full of rage and betrayal and is keeping Carol Ann close and doesn't plan on letting her go so easily. This thing appears to Carol Ann as just another child, but in reality is a ravaged beast, and this news sends shivers into everyone gathered around. So once they get Carol Ann on the Ghost Dimension speakerphone, Tangina informs Diane to tell Carol Ann to lead the spirits to the light. She then tells everyone to clear their minds so the beast doesn't know their fears to use against them. Once this is done, they open the door to the bedroom. Once inside, we see that it is completely dark except for the flickering bright light coming from the closet. Ryan then is directed to wait downstairs in the living room, while Tangina tosses 2 tennis balls into the closet portal and Ryan is downstairs waiting. We see the 2 tennis balls drop out of the portal in the living room ceiling. So now we have established our entry and exit points for this ghost dimension. Diane is then called into the room, and as she stands staring into the bright flashes of light, we see Steve toss one end of the rope into the portal and then come behind Diane and begin tying a rope around her waist. Back in the living room, the end of the rope drops down from the ceiling portal and Ryan signals he has it. Once the back end of the rope has been secured around Diane, her and Steve share a romantic kiss as she begins walking towards the portal. She looks back and yells for Steven not to let go, which he replies, "Never." So as Diane disappears into the light, Tangina begins a chant for the ghost to cross over into the light. This kind of freaks Steve out, so he begins to try to pull on the rope, hoping to pull Diane out. Of course, the portal doesn't like this and starts flashing a bunch when suddenly a giant head of the beast comes out of the closet and growls at Steve. It also shoots some kind of like blue energy thing at Tangina, knocking her unconscious. Downstairs, Ryan and Lesh begin pulling on their end of the rope, where they see a curled up Diane tightly holding what appears to be a child. Diane comes crashing down onto the living room floor, unconscious and covered in goo. Steve runs down and quickly picks up his wife and daughter, rushing them to a tub that has been filled with water as preparation. Man, there's like a really small thing in this scene that I think is cool. When she comes down, she hits the ground, and Steve's running down the stairs. Ryan goes to help her or whatever. And Steve is like, jumps to her and immediately is like screaming at Ryan not to touch her. And that's like such a realistic human reaction when your loved one is hurt and there's a kind of somebody there that you don't know. And you're like, get the fuck off of them, let me take care of it. Especially when it's, your wife and kid. But I thought that it's a 2-second scene and there's so much going on. A lot of people don't pick it up, but I think that's such good character writing. And
Yeah.
acting. Phenomenal job acting because he looks pretty pissed off. He looks like he's freaking out.
He acted that really good. And that is definitely human nature, especially somebody that not only you don't really know, but that they don't really know. Your loved one wouldn't want somebody they don't know, like picking them up. Yeah, I thought for one, I think before they got this far, I don't know why they didn't tie the goddamn rope off to something instead of going through all that in the process. But I don't get Steve, like, I guess he gets freaked out. It's kind of confusing. So she starts saying, like, go towards the light, and Steve gets freaked out and pulls his wife back, but doesn't really make very much sense because you would think, Diane would know. She would know not to go into the light. Like, she knew that was part of the plan.
I feel like he didn't understand the plan.
Yeah,
He's so worried that things are going to go wrong that he just forgot the plan or didn't understand it.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they forgot to game plan him in. Maybe he was sleeping.
I will say that it's very much speculated that because remember Tangina tells him, whatever you do, do not pull the rope until I say. And he obviously doesn't wait for that. And a lot of people think that this is the reason that it comes back because he kind of fucked it up, which is a really good point.
Yeah. Yeah. That is a good point. I never thought about that because he does completely fuck it up. And I was surprised, that it went so well that she, his wife had got her and they fell through and everything went well. And it was like the movie could have ended there, but it really went too well for a plan that was botched.
So after some attempts by Steve to wake Diane up, she opens her eyes and then wakes Carol Ann up. Ryan, who is now recording this event, closes the door and pans toward Tangina, who confidently removes her glasses and says, "This house is clean." So now the Freeling family lives happily ever after.
Yeah.
Or do they?
Covered in their spiritual cum.
Gross.
Their purple goop. Whatever the fuck that was supposed to be.
So the next day, we see the family outside with a moving truck and all of their possessions in boxes. All of the kids are now back, and Dana is on her way out for a date with her boyfriend. Diane tells her that they will be staying in a motel tonight, so have Brian bring her home early.
Diane's got a nice Nancy Grace streak going.
You know, another funny thing here is Diane says, we're going to be staying at the Motel 6 off of like 41. And Dana goes, "Oh yeah, I remember that place." And Diane goes, "What? Like, how the fuck do you know about the Motel 6 on
I
47 or
did.
whatever?" Yeah,
I
it's
didn't
funny.
catch that. I think it's a Holiday Inn,
Yeah, or
actually. And I
whatever.
was like, damn.
So obviously she has been going there or has been there without her family.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how those were in the 80s, but those are pretty rough nowadays for
Yeah.
your 16-year-old daughter to be hanging out there.
Yeah. So after loading some boxes, Steve tells his wife that he's going to run to the office to grab his belongings, but he will be back later and be prepared to leave when he returns. So we then jump ahead, like I guess it's a few hours, and we see that Diane has put the kids to bed and is preparing to take a long hot bath. Did you happen to notice that she's wearing like a Freddy Krueger type sweater?
No.
She's got the red and green striped sweater on.
Oh, I didn't notice that. I know she's got that Nancy streak in her hair
She's got a
now.
Nancy streak too, yeah.
Yeah, maybe that was a little shout out. What the fuck happened to Steve getting off early? He's like, I'm gonna be
forever.
here. I'm getting off early. Like, don't worry. If the kids get a little tired, you can let them take a nap. And then next thing you know, she's putting the kids to bed. Like, it's late at night. There's no fucking way I would have my kids in that house.
Well, one thing...
Not only not in the house, but
Not
they're
in the
now
room.
in that fucking room that nobody's been in months because it's been like a fucking paranormal poltergeist tornado going on in there.
Yeah, I mean, this is actually the first time I never noticed it, but he apparently didn't drive himself to the office because we see Teak drop him off later. So maybe the holdup was like his old boss was like, "Yeah, maybe I'm going to try to talk you into staying for a couple more hours. I'm not going to take you home." I don't know, but I never really noticed
I feel
that.
like maybe they messed that up because he's talking to her before and she's like, well, what if he doesn't understand when he's talking about leaving? And he's like, well, I'll make him understand.
Because I'll give him
That would have been
directions.
a weird comment to make. Why your boss is sitting there in the car waiting for you to get in.
It's not explained how he gets there, but obviously he doesn't drive himself because
Maybe he rode that bike, that kid's bike.
So while Robbie is laying in bed, he hears a noise in the room, and as he sits up, he notices the clown doll is no longer sitting on the chair. He then checks under his bed to find nothing, but when he sits up, the clown grabs him from behind and wraps his arm around his neck. The clown chuckles as he pulls Robbie under the bed, and this commotion causes Carol Ann to suddenly jump up. Meanwhile, Diane is laying back on the bed when she then gets attacked by an invisible force that starts dragging her up the wall and onto the ceiling. This was, of course, done with the famous rotating room.
Yeah, this is actually a really impressive rotating room, considering you really probably would never notice it unless you're really paying attention, but that room is covered in boxes and junk that they had just packed up.
It's even got these long curtains in the back, but
Yeah.
there's even like a piece of paper. Like there's like stuffing paper that you would, I don't know, wrap around your glass
it's like
or
a bunch
whatever.
of junk and stuff from packing.
And it doesn't move. It was a great job.
Yeah, that was one thing I never picked up on. And I was like, wow, that's really impressive that they were able to, instead of being lazy and just being like, oh, well, it's a house that's already packed up anyway, let's just put nothing in the room. They obviously spent a significant amount of time going in and making sure every single piece of paper was secured down on the floor. This is interesting too. Another kind of Nightmare on Elm Street, I won't say reference, but so the rotating room where Johnny Depp dies in with the blood, that if they do a rotating room with the blood.
Well, they flipped that one upside down. I don't think then that scene it rotates.
No, but they had to build the rotating set because they had to flip it upside down to dump all the blood.
Well, they mainly had it for the very first kill, which is her friend who gets, while the boyfriend's in the room, she gets drug all over the ceiling, like bleeding. Is
Yeah.
like,
But if I could be wrong, but I remember, if I'm remembering right, I think Johnny Depp's character has a jersey shirt on like that.
he does, yeah. He has
It's
a
like
little.
a crop
It's
top.
yeah, it's
It's
weird.
got like a jersey crop top on, and that's what she's wearing during this rotating room scene. So
guys were really into showing their bellies back then for some reason.
yeah, it was a weird thing with, I guess, teenagers in the 80s. They wanted to dress like women do in the early 2000s with crop tops. But yeah, I wonder if that was another kind of ode to the Nightmare on Elm Street, because I just thought that was interesting. They're wearing almost the same shirt in the rotating room scene.
Yeah.
I know Nightmare on Elm Street, that particular scene, they actually almost electrocuted the fuck out of everybody.
It became a nightmare. So Robbie finally gets free and starts ripping the clown doll into pieces when suddenly the closet door opens up and another bright light begins shining. Diane then tries to run to the kids' room to save them, but gets a shock when she grabs the doorknob. As Robbie attempts to open the door, he finds it somehow locked. And now, on the outside of the door, the beast appears, attempting to scare Diane away from the children. This causes Diane to fall down the stairs into the living room. She then tries to go out the front door, but gets blasted across the living room. Diane then finally gets out of the house through the back door and screams for help to her neighbor. While back there, she manages to somehow clumsily fall into this fucking muddy pool hole.
Yeah, I thought about this too. I'm like, how do you accidentally step over to the left like that and then fall into the pool? But I just chalked it up to this poltergeist in this house did just throw her like fucking 10 feet in the house.
She's a little woozy.
So, well, I'm thinking maybe it gave her a little nudge.
Maybe. Oh, yeah, maybe.
Because you know what was waiting in the pool for. But maybe it gave her a little nudge. And this is the beginning to my favorite scene in the entire movie. Probably the one that stuck with me the most as a child. This pool scene was absolutely terrifying as a kid.
So while she is down there, a skeleton floats up to the surface and yells in her face. And as she turns around and attempts to get out, she realizes that she is now surrounded by decayed old bodies.
Yeah, by some real life, somebody out there's grandpa. Real life grandpa's
and everything,
skeletons floating in there with her.
So as she finally climbs out of the deep end, a fucking whole casket rises out of the ground and opens up, allowing this old lady skeleton to fall in front of her. She then attempts to climb up the side of the hole, and she kind of loses her grip, and the neighbor finally shows up and pulls her out. You know what's weird is I always, for the longest time, remember that scene with the dad, with Steve in the pool.
Steve pulling her out?
No, Steve in the pool with the bodies. Yeah, I don't know, man. I just, for some reason, it was in my head wrong.
Yeah, I always remembered it as her, because that scene, like I said, was the scene that stuck out the most to me. And I think what scared me the most outside of the bodies, the really good looking bodies floating up, was that she tries to climb out of the shallow end. But of course, there's no steps. Then, so you're looking at like a 4-foot muddy ledge with it pouring rain. And she can't get up. Like she's slipping back down. It's like trying to climb wet clay. And the idea, as a kid, the idea of being trapped in this pool, and as a kid, you know if that happened to you, that you have no chance of getting out of there. and seeing like the casket float up, and then it's mainly when she falls back down into the deep end with all those bodies. That moment stuck out in my head the most. That burned into my memory. I love that scene. I think it's the best shot. The entire movie is the above shot of her sliding back down.
It looks great. She tries to get her neighbor to come inside and help her save the children, but he
No,
declines.
no. He didn't decline. Ben's wife is a bitch.
Well, he eventually says, I'm not going in there. That was like the
Yeah.
last thing he says.
Yeah, but he goes to run in there with her, and his wife grabs him by the arm and
Mhm.
pulls him back and is like, "No, you're not going in there." And they're like, "That what kind of noise is that?" They can hear the kids like screaming and all this fucked up shit going on. And Ben's wife is like, "Fuck those kids.
Yeah.
Those aren't our kids."
Yeah. That's fucked up, man.
That is fucked up.
Like, if I seen that and the woman was begging for my help, I would totally run in there. I wouldn't think it was anything supernatural. I'd think there's a fire or something going on, but
Well, I mean, they did look in that pool and probably see all those bodies when they were pulling her out.
I wouldn't have stopped me from
But
saving some
no,
kids.
no, absolutely not. I'm saying though, I would have maybe thought, something supernatural, some weird shit's going on here, or the neighbors have been killing people, putting them in their pool that they're building.
That could have crossed my mind.
But yeah, there's no doubt. Like if the neighbor next door had kids and there was something going on and they needed my help, like I wouldn't think twice about running in there.
So she says fuck it and she runs in, and once she finally reaches the top of the steps, the hallway stretches into a long corridor. Now, this is a really cool camera trick. They actually did this so the camera is sitting on a dolly, and they actually pull the camera back while zooming in, and it creates this long corridor tunnel effect. You can do it on essentially any camera.
That's
Yeah.
pretty cool.
So Diane runs down to the door, and when she opens it, she almost gets sucked into this like giant red hole where the closet used to be.
The vagina?
Yeah,
Big
it could.
vagina
Yeah.
hole?
We also see that Robbie and Carol Ann are holding onto the bed for dear life. Diane gets a better grip and is able to brace herself in the doorway and pull Robbie and Carol Ann to safety in the hallway right before a tentacle coming from the portal grabs Robbie's leg. Outside, we see Steve has just arrived and sees all of the windows in the house lit up like a disco ball. He quickly runs in to save his family, but as soon as he goes to open the front door, he is blocked by a casket rising up to the ground, which also blocks Diane and the kids from escaping. This kicks off all hell breaking loose as caskets begin popping out of the ground everywhere. Steven spots his former boss, Mr. Teague, out by the sidewalk watching in horror. He then runs up and grabs him by the shirt, saying, "You son of a bitch, you moved the cemetery, but left the bodies." Diane and the kids finally escape through the back door. There's something about that back door the beast can't fuck with. Like, that's 2 or 3 times now he's blocked the front door, but left the back door totally free and clear. So the family then all jump into the station wagon and prepare to escape the horrific scene, but just as Steve gets the car started, a severely decomposed body comes crashing through the garage and lands on the hood. This prompts Steve to hit the gas and come flying out of the driveway, and at the same time, a red car pulls up and Dana gets out screaming at the sight of her house.
So it kind of makes sense now that you say that Dana's not Diane's actual daughter. I don't know if you noticed, but Diane's like, go, what are you waiting for? Go. She's like, fuck Dana.
Well, so that's a
waiting
big
for
thing
her.
Robbie's yelling too. He's yelling go, and like
Yeah.
he's trying to tell Dana get in the car, and Robbie's just like go, 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 go.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're like fuck her.
Fuck her. And another thing, Dana's got a massive hickey on her neck.
Didn't
So
notice that.
they definitely make it in this movie. Dana gets around.
She's at the
Gets around the
Holiday Inn.
hotel. She gets around her friend's house. She gets around.
Everyone is yelling for Dana to get in the car, which she does, and the Freelings speed off down the road, dodging all of these caskets that have now begun to burst out of the ground all throughout the neighborhood. Back to Mr. Teague, who is still standing in front of the house, hears a very loud growl as light begins bursting out of the home. We see a big burst erupt and knock him and all the neighbors to the ground, while the house then begins to implode on itself. The house pretty much crumbles as it then gets sucked into a ball of light, leaving nothing but an empty lot and a stunned Mr. Teague.
I wish that they would have sucked him in with the house.
So, the house scene, they actually built a very big model of the house. And the way that they did it was they actually flipped the camera. Like they put the house like on the back and put the camera above it. And behind it, they had like a vacuum type hose, and they had a bunch of special effects guys stand around it with shotguns and fucking shoot it. And as it was breaking into pieces, it was getting like pulled and sucked into this hole.
That's awesome.
It is awesome. And Steven Spielberg actually had the pieces collected and placed into like a thing of resin or something. And it sits atop of his fucking piano at his house.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Completely not safe. I'm sure they broke a lot of rules with a bunch of special effects guys standing around shooting shotguns. But that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really cool. So we then see the Freelings arrive at a roadside motel where they are all very dirty and exhausted. They walk into the room, and after a moment, Steve opens the door and rolls the TV outside and slams the door shut.
This was before all the Motel 6s and Holiday Inns were used for shameful sex and homemade pharmaceutical sales.
You think the hotel people were like, Dana, you just left here. You're already back.
It's like, Dana, you're in the wrong room. You're supposed to be in
room are you?
6B?
Yeah. But that is the end of Poltergeist. All right. So
I absolutely fucking love that whole end scene.
where all the chaos and all that.
Yeah,
it's great.
when the bodies, the caskets start popping out the ground and the bodies are opening or are flopping out of it, and the house being sucked into the portal, like literally that one portal in the room, and the entire house gets sucked into it, and that whole from right before the pool scene, when the portal first opens up on to the end, that whole climax, I thought was awesome.
Yeah, so I want to say I read somewhere that there's like a 14-minute that like a lot of that takes place in like just 14 minutes, and there's like no dialogue. It's all just freaking out. Yeah, but I feel like I mean I remember like her yelling for the neighbor and the neighbor and all that stuff.
Yeah,
Saying, so that just doesn't seem right. But
maybe there's not significant dialogue. Because the neighbor definitely says very clearly, "Fuck those kids.
Yeah.
They're on their own." Yes, I've seen a post of somebody being like, what it's a good movie, but what the fuck was up with this last like 20 minutes of the movie? I'm like, but those are the best 20 minutes of the movie.
Well, I have seen a lot of people say that really when we have that kind of fake ending, that it almost becomes a complete different movie at that point, which I can see.
Yeah, but I thought
it's the end.
I feel like that's Tobe Hooper directed the last like 15 minutes. Like it's actually dark and scary. Like there's shit popping out the ground. But I think that's what I was saying with the contrast of the rest of the movie not really feeling like that. There's certain parts of it that feels that way. But the rest of the movie, it makes that last like 15, 20 minutes that much darker. Because you don't expect the bodies to start popping out like that and these dead bodies to start, coming out of these caskets everywhere. Even the pool scene, like with all the bodies in there, it's just, you don't expect that.
Well, I think it's a really awesome reveal because even though you found out earlier that this used to be a cemetery, he, explains that, well, they moved everything. And you think, okay, well, maybe the ghosts are just haunting it because they were there for so long. But this is where you find out, no. He moved the headstones, but the bodies have been there the whole time. And that is why this has occurred. Now, I will say that we had a conversation earlier, and I said I would shed some light on why this happened.
So do you so my theory watching it, and you may have a better insight, especially knowing kind of the story of the second one. I don't know if they touch on that, but my thoughts were them having that pool put in interrupted some shit.
No, that wasn't quite it. So what happened was we know from Steve's statements in the movie that they actually moved into the house 6 years ago. And his daughter, Carol Ann, is 5 years old. So basically, we find out in the second movie that when Carol Ann, it was the only child that was born and brought to that house. The other children they had before they moved there. And when Carol Ann was born, it kind of awoken the spirits that had been asleep slash dead, like there. They had, they weren't haunting shit. But what really sparks this situation is we find out that Carol Ann has some psychic abilities. And when she turns 5, this point in time in the story, she, is 5 years old. Her psychic abilities just clicked on, and all these spirits see it when it happens. This is why they're so focused on Carol Ann and not the rest of the house, the rest of the members of the family.
Do-
This is why they steal her.
Does Carol Ann shine?
Yeah,
Does
maybe.
she have the
Maybe.
shining?
Yeah, maybe. But yeah, and this becomes a huge part of the story in the second one. It is actually Tangina is actually the one who informs Diane. Carol Ann is psychic. She has a natural ability, and that is why the stuff at your previous house happened. So, yeah, even though they had lived there years before and nothing had happened, that is why all of a sudden something happened.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also have a theory. I guess not knowing the second movie really kind of hinders it. They may explain it in the second movie, but I have a theory that this portal that opens up, this is not the first time this has happened. This has happened in other places. Not necessarily in this neighborhood, but it has happened other places. And my theory to that is all those watches and shit that fell out of that portal, they never explain where those
No,
come from.
no, they don't.
And she mentions some of them are really, really old, really dated. And she mentions some of them are actually relatively new from the last like 2 or 3 years. And he doesn't recognize them. So they obviously came from somewhere else.
Mm,
And
good
so
point.
my theory is that, and now knowing that with Carol Ann, maybe other people who have her abilities, this has happened elsewhere.
Mm,
Originally, my theory was maybe this has opened up somewhere else in the neighborhood before. Like it didn't necessarily start at this house. Maybe it opened up in other places. But with her having psychic abilities, maybe it's just happened to other people like Carol Ann. I do
that's not bad.
I do like the idea of the whole bodies not being moved, but the headstone. I remember that standing out to me as a kid too. This shit happens though.
That's actually based off of something that did really happen. Yeah. The
Yeah,
contractor actually ended up going to jail, but they had already built this, I want to say it was like a courthouse over top of it. And by the time they found out about it, they couldn't tear up the courthouse foundation to get the bodies out. So the bodies are still to this day there.
yeah. So, well, as you know, I did for a very very short time the ghost tours in Charleston, and I actually got to do a lot of the studying and stuff. You go through and you have to learn the entire history and stuff to get certified. And downtown Charleston is actually full of places with dead bodies under them. They're everywhere. The biggest example that they know of that I can think of off the top of my head is, St. Philip's Church, where the famous ghost picture was taken. So there's the graveyard and then the cemetery across the street. That used to all be a graveyard. And they actually the city was like, we're paving a fucking road through here. And they agreed to move the bodies, but essentially they moved the headstones, never moved the bodies. So that whole road is nothing but bodies underneath. And it's very common in Charleston. Every 5 years or so, we see a thing in the news that they're doing some work at a house and they find bones. They find human remains. So it does happen.
Yeah. So you already know about the real human skeletons that were used in the swimming pool scene, but what you probably don't know is Jo Beth Williams, who plays Diane, was actually never made aware of this until the scene was over, which she was not very pleased about.
Yeah, I bet she wasn't. I mean, and if I'm her in hindsight, I would be happy that I didn't know if I had to do it anyway. Because my thought watching that was, man, I hope she didn't know she was sliding into dead bodies in that scene, because that would have been awful. Like,
Well, you got the dead
she has to
bodies in
fall.
the water,
She
and
has,
then the water gets in your mouth. Ugh.
yeah, she has to slide down in that fucking water, and she goes like she submerges in it, like her hair's soaking, and that makes working with dead bodies so much worse when you have to get in the bath with them. It's awful.
So the clown puppet is on display in Planet Hollywood in Caesar's Palace, Las Vegas.
Did they say how long it's been there?
No, I don't have that info.
I'm going to look up a little more into that. I wonder if it's sold since, or it's being leased out to them, or maybe the owner of Caesar's Palace is
I mean, they probably got enough money.
somebody who bought it. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's somebody with a lot of money to spend almost $750,000 on the doll.
So Stephen King was actually approached to write the screenplay for this, and this would have been the first written by King directly for film, but unfortunately they could not agree on the terms. Which, I don't know really what else Stephen King could have added. I like the screenplay they came up with. It's good. So I'm not upset about that. And just to leave it on a little bit of a creepy note, at around 49 minutes, the television is on channel 12. This is the channel that they say they pick up Carol Ann the best. And Heather O'Rourke, who played Carol Ann, actually died at the age of 12.
Yeah.
Kind of creepy.
Yeah, that's a really sad story. People who watched this movie, I know this stood out to me before I had ever seen the movie, but it looks like she kind of has swollen cheeks, like kind of like chipmunk cheeks. And you don't know if it's because she's just a really cute kid, but her face looks a little swollen, and that was actually due to the steroids that she was taking at the time for Crohn's disease, and she was actually falsely diagnosed. She actually was born with a blockage that had been getting worse over the years, and essentially eventually led to her intestines bursting and her going into shock.
Yeah, it's weird because every time it's brought up, like her death is brought up, we always see this picture of her back when she was like 5, 6 years old. She was almost a teenager when she died. I mean, she was 12 going on 13, and it's weird because we don't ever see that version of her, but that's actually, she was a lot older than in this movie.
Yeah, but that's still a kid.
Oh, it's
That's
definitely
like
still a kid, and it
kid.
sucks. But it's just every time that they talk about it, they show the 5-year-old version of her, not the 12-year-old version of her, because she's in the second one. All right, so ratings and kill count. The total kill is 1. 1 kill in the whole movie, which is the bird.
The bird.
Yep,
There's
that's
actually some really good foreshadowing with the bird.
Yeah.
When the bird is being buried, Robbie's in the tree, and you hear him in the background make the comment, so when it turns into just bones, can we dig it up? That's the comment he makes from the tree. He's like laughing about it, and that's some good foreshadowing that, the bones being dug up. But also, later on after that, when they're digging the pool, you actually see the little cigar box that the bird was buried in being dug up. So 2 different foreshadowings with the bird, kind of some hints to what was to come.
All right, so rating. I picked it, so I'm gonna go first. I gave this movie a 4.1. I do find it a little hard to rate because so much of it is wholesome, and if it wouldn't been for the crazy end, like the end, I wouldn't like that end really brings it up for me because I feel like the first half is, like, really wholesome. One thing this movie has going for it though is the family dynamic is really it makes you latch on to the characters and it makes you care about the characters, which horror movies have a really hard time making you really like the character, like feel for them. Especially like fans like us that are so used to rooting for the bad guy and just watching the people get cut down. It's almost our favorite parts of movies, and it's almost reversed here in this one where we don't want anything to happen to any of the family members. So it has like I think that's the dynamic that it has going for it. It's really hard for other films to replicate it. Because not only do you have to have really good writing, but you have to have really good actors and actors with good chemistry, and this family does that phenomenally.
That is so the acting definitely. All the family members are they play their part extremely well, and it makes it genuine. Like you were saying, it feels legit.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't, like, rate it a 4.1 for it being scary. It doesn't do a lot of something that I would necessarily find really scary, but what I really like about it is a horror movie, but it has fantastic characters and character building and acting. The effects are, I mean, they're not bad, but they're not great. I'm glad that they used the real bodies because that was the best effect they had. I mean, by far. It's what everyone remembers about it. But I think it's a good movie. It did something at the time that was not, repeated over and over and over again like we see now. And I think it set the tone for those movies that we see now. So yeah, I give it a 4.1. I think it's a very Spielberg movie though. 100%.
So for me, I gave it a 4.2.
Damn, that's
Uh,
close.
yeah, yeah. I'm surprised that you rated it that high. I could give this movie a 4.3. I almost changed it, but I left it at a 4.2. This movie is hard to rate because this movie is special to me because, like I mentioned before, one of those handfuls of movies that I do remember as the first horror movies I watched, and that left an impression on me. I mean, despite the weirdness, there's just certain scenes that I think are especially the pool scene, the whole climax. I thought that whole scene just burned into my head.
Has a lot of iconic lines and moments.
Yeah, the portal opening up at the end, that's one that always stuck in my head. The clown, one that always stuck in my head. I feel like this movie is so much different from anything else in the ghost subgenre, especially for the time that we had ever gotten. It's definitely a paranormal story done in a way that we had never seen. The idea of a portal to a dimension between life and I guess the afterlife, with a family whose daughter's lost in her own home that she is haunting while the family is aware of it. I thought it was really good writing. That's something that I think up until this point had never been done. And other than Insidious, has not been done much, but this I think blows Insidious away. You can definitely feel the Spielberg heavy influence in this, but it still manages to have its moments. I think especially from a parent's perspective. I mentioned that earlier, but the idea of your child being lost in the house with you and you can hear them and slightly speak to them, but you can't get to them is just absolutely horrifying. I think this movie isn't perfect by far. It has multiple scenes there that stuck with me from the moment I seen them. At some point in my life, I was 5 years old, laying under the covers, thinking, scared to death about the scenes in this movie, And, it's those moments that really was the early beginnings of me loving horror. So this will always be a special movie.
Well, once again, we thank you guys for listening. Please give us a follow or like if you enjoy the show. Check out the website, check out the socials, tell a friend, a family member, or your privacy invading poltergeist about us. We hope to see you next time. You got bit? Oh, wow!